Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Dehner. I'm one of the Tableau Visionaries. Today, I want to talk to you about parameters and how to use parameters. I use them a lot, and I hope you do also. Let's start by talking about what parameters are. They're just values, or better put, it's a way that a user can input a single value into Tableau. Okay, and that value is global. The parameter value is the same throughout the entire workbook, and it remains the same until it's changed manually. And it can either be changed through a dropdown, you can key in a value, or you can use a parameter action to change that value. I want to start by looking at some sets and some filters. And I get questions all the time from users. They say, I've got a parameter that filters, and that's not really the case. You have a parameter value that is used in a filter, and the filter is what does the work. Parameter values don't do anything at all until they're used in either a calculated field or in a filter. Let's take a look at how we can use one in a filter. First, we have to set up the parameter. I'm going to show you how I did this. This is typically I'd just go up here and open this up and create a parameter. Give the parameter a name so that you can find it later. And you have to select the data type that you're going to use. Okay. There are floating point numbers. Those are those with a decimal point, an integer, a string value or text, Boolean parameter, dates and dates time, and spatial parameters. And we're going to show you examples of all of these during the presentation. In this particular one, I created a list. And in that list, all I did was key in these values. I keyed in furniture, office supplies, and technology, which are the values for category in the Superstore data set that I use in this and most of the examples. I also keyed in an additional value, all, just ALL. Now we're going to create a calculation that we can use for the filter. And this calculation simply says, it says, hey, if the category equals the parameter value, return a true, or if the parameter value equals all, return a true, otherwise return a false. So I can place that on the filter shelf and I can set that filter to true like I did here. So now, whenever I change a parameter value, the parameter value is set to furniture, so the furniture data is the only data that's available on this worksheet. All the other data has been filtered out. I can change that to office supplies, and now only the office supply data is available on this worksheet, and the technology and furniture data has been filtered out. And likewise, we can look at technology, or we can have all the data available to us. Well, if I can do this for a true value, I can also look at just the opposite with a false value. And if I set the parameter, which is just a value, I set the parameter to furniture and filter out the data from our calculation, set this to false, we are now filtering out the furniture data, and the only value that's available is office supplies and technology. If we were to look at all, there's no data available and the worksheet is blank. Or we can look at office supplies and look at have the furniture data and the technology data available. I'm going to reset this to true because that's what I need for the rest of the presentation. Now I can use that same formula that we used here. I'm just going to use it to create a set. And we can open up this set. And on the condition tab for the set, I put that same formula in here. The category equals category parameter, or the category parameter equals all. And it's going to return a true when either of those conditions are met and a false any other time. Now, unlike filters, sets do not eliminate data from your data set. All it does is reclassify it into two groups, the in group and the out group. So based on that formula, when we set the parameter to office supplies is in the set, and the other two categories, furniture and technology, are out. And we can do the same here, and we can see the technology is in and the others are out. Or we could have all the values in the set. I want to put these on the same dashboard. I've just taken that first worksheet we looked at with filter, using the parameter as a filter, and then I included this second worksheet. I use that same parameter to create a set. So you can see the difference. If I take furniture, for example, in the parameter, our filter returns only furniture in the first example, and in the second example, furniture becomes the value that is in the set. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really like having a long list of data in a dropdown to choose from. So I've included in this example a value picker, and our value picker is nothing more than another worksheet. I've used square marks, and in there I've got the category on color, and I've also got the category name in the square, and I've added that to our worksheet. And all we need now is to create a parameter action that connects the item that I select from the value picker and puts it in to the parameter, our category parameter. That's a parameter that we're using on this dashboard now. And that's our target parameter, and the field that we're using is the category field. And what I'd like to do is when I clear the selection, I want it to return an all. So now if I select from our value picker office supplies, our parameter changes to office supplies, our filter changes to office supplies, and office supplies are in the set. We can change it to technology, or we can change it to furniture, and when we clear the value, all values will show up. Okay, we're showing you how we can use parameters to create sets and to create filters. Let's see some other things that can be done with parameters. I like to use parameters in date functions, and it provides a lot of flexibilities. We get a lot of users who will ask questions. They say, hey, what I'd like to do is I'd like the viewer to be able to change the level of the data. I'd like them to be able to look at weeks or months or years at their choice. And a parameter is a perfect function to use for that. Let's take a look here at this first example. And once again, we have to start with a parameter. And we created a parameter. Once again, I keyed in this value. It's a string parameter, and it's a list. Now, it's important to note that there's two columns here. One is the value, and the other is the displayed as. The displayed as is what you see in the selection box or the dropdown. Here I'm using radio buttons to select from. The value is what is used in the calculation, and that value has to be the same syntax that you're going to use in the calculation. I'm going to be using date functions, and that value represents the level. And the syntax for that level in date function is singular and lowercase. So we say day, not days, week, not weeks. So this value has to have that same syntax. You can display it as anything. We can call this days, and this week's week if you want. And all we've done is we've changed what you see, but we haven't changed the value that's going into the calculation. Now, the calculation we're going to use is a date function. And the date function we're using is a date trunc, and date trunc returns the first value of the period, and the period we're able to select from the parameter, and it's based on order date. Okay. I've added to the columns as an exact date and a continuous date. And with that, we can now we're looking at weeks, we can look at months, we can look at years, we can look at days. And the user now has the flexibility to select the level they want to see. Now you might say, hey, you know what I'd really like to see? I want to see this as a discrete value, not a continuous value. Well, we can do that too. We'll just change this to discrete. We've got the exact date there. And if we wanted to make this like a bar graph, for example, it could be a bar graph at the month level, the year level, or the week level. Now there's one other date function that comes up over and over again. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with my blog, there's a post out there about 5 ways to do year-over-year calculations, and that's the number one hit on my blog. It has over 40,000 hits on the blog. Users will come in and they'll say, "Hey, I don't know how to solve this problem. I've applied a filter for this year, and I can calculate this year's sales, but I can't do last year's sales." Well, they applied a filter, so they've got this year's sales, and no other data is available in the worksheet. They filtered it out. But we can solve that problem by using a parameter. And here we're going to use a different type of parameter. This is a date parameter. And I set up this parameter to select an end date, an end of a period of the year-to-date calculation. What's the date that you want it calculated to? It's a date type data. And I've used this when the book opens option to select the date for the initial value. And you can see I've set it to something here called today LOD. Well, we're going to take a look at that. And that's its value. It's a calculation. And this calculation is nothing more than the today function, today, and it's wrapped in braces, and those braces make it an LOD. It's actually called a table LOD. It looks at the entire table, and all LODs have to be aggregated. So we have a choice of min or max, and for today, it's going to return the same whether we use min or max. You cannot use attribute. Don't try to use attribute. It just plain doesn't work that way. Okay. Now we need a calculation for the year to date. This looks rather involved, but it's really quite straightforward. All we're going to do is at the category level, we're going to sum the sales. If the order date year is the same as the parameter date year, and the order date day is less than or equal to the parameter day, then that's this year's sales. We can also modify that to find last year's sales, and all we have to do is we set our date equal to the same date as the parameter had for last year. We're using another date function to decrement that parameter by 1 year. We use it there for the year. We use it once again down here for the day. And now we've got this year's sales and we've got last year's sales. And then the year over year is very simple. Take the difference and divide it by the prior year. And this works for the year-to-date value. And I happen to be doing this on November the 8th. And sure enough, when we opened the book, November the 8th showed up in the parameter. But you may not want that. You may want to look at the values through the 1st of August. And this allows you to change that value to the 1st of August. And now we're looking at the year-to-date values versus prior year through the 1st of August. Okay, we've looked at 2 different ways we can use parameters with date functions. I want to turn now to probably my favorite new feature, and that's dynamic zone visibility. And if you haven't used dynamic zone visibility, please use it. Once again, you can go out to my blog. I've got 2 different blogs and a couple of different videos on how to use dynamic zone visibility. What dynamic zone visibility allows you to do, it allows you to pop views in and out of the worksheet and do sheet swapping, and it's very, very easy and straightforward to do. But there's 3 things we have to know to use dynamic zone visibility. First, we have to set up a Boolean filter for each image that we want to add to the worksheet. And I know that sounds kind of technical. Boolean filter is just a true-false statement. That's all it is. We just want to return either a true or a false. We have to use that Boolean trigger in the viz. And then we all have to set up the controls for the dynamic zone visibility on the layout tab of a dashboard. Let's start by looking at this. I've made a parameter that will look at either bars, lines, or text. And when I select a value in that parameter, I want to see the corresponding chart in my dashboard. If I've got lines, I want to see lines. If we set up for bars, I want to see bars. If we set up for text, I want to see text. But also with that, when the parameter value is either bars or lines, I want to see this legend up here, but I don't want to see it for text. It has no meaning for text, and it's just confusing. Well, let's see how we'd go about setting that up. You start by creating a bar chart, a line chart, and a text chart, obviously. And we're just going to look at the bar chart to get started here. And we always have to start with the parameter. So let's see what that looks like. And it's a string parameter. There's no current value when we open the book. The values are bars, lines, or text, and those are just keyed in. That's all there is to it. Now to this Boolean filter thing. Well, here's the Boolean filter for bars, and it's nothing more than a formula that says if the parameter equals bars, return a true, and we've got 1 for lines, and we've got 1 for text. But remember we said we wanted to see that those legends, this legend up here, we want to see that legend for either bars or lines. And that trigger looks like this. If the parameter value is in, and that's just another function in bars or lines, return a true, otherwise return a false. Okay. Now let's go back to our dashboard. I'm going to go to the finished dashboard and show you how to set that up on the layout tab of the dashboard itself. First, we're going to select the chart. We've got this set to lines, and I've selected the line chart, and you can see it here. It says lines. We can show the title or we can hide the title. We're going to show the title. And this is where you set up the trigger to control the visibility. We select that, we want to use dynamic visibility. And the trigger is going to be line for lines. And we said on this is our category legend. And the trigger for that is that other value we set up, either lines or bars. And we look at bars. We've done the same sort of thing for bars. We're looking at bars, and bars is the trigger, the Boolean for bars, and we can look at text. And when we look at text, we can see that sure enough, the text Boolean trigger comes into play, and we only see the text value. We don't see bars or lines, and we also don't see the legend. So it's working exactly like we wanted it to work. Okay. Now, there's an additional question we get from users. They want to be able to select the measure that they want the viewer to be able to select the measure, to have control over what measure they want to see. And we can do that with another type of parameter. We're going to set up that parameter, different parameter. It's a string parameter again. And the measures they want to choose from is sales, quantity, or profit ratio. They want to see the sales when they select sales. They want to see quantity when they select quantity, and they want to see the profit ratio when they select profit ratio. Well, we can do that by setting up this case statement. A case statement is like an if statement. If you don't use case statements, you really should get familiar with them. And what this says is the case is the parameter value. And when the parameter value equals sales, then some sales. When the parameter value equals quantity, some quantity. When the parameter value equals profit ratio, then use profit ratio. If you know the Superstore data set, profit ratio is already aggregated, so all of these have to be aggregated to the same level or you'll get an aggregation error. And then all we do is we put the case statement up here on columns, and when the user can now select what measure he wants to see. It's now set for profit ratio. If you wanted to see sales, he can select it for sales, or we can select quantity, or we can select the profit ratio. So we've given the user a way to customize the dashboard using parameters. It's a pretty cool tool. Now I want to show you how to use spatial parameters. And we're going to look at two different examples here. In this first example, I have all the Starbucks locations in the city of New York. I've downloaded them as a point file. The file looks something like this. All it is it's an identifier for the store location, its address, and the latitude and longitude for those locations. What I want to be able to do for each one of those stores is I want to plot the store location on a map. I want to be able to select one of those locations and then draw a circle around that location of a radius here, 0.5. And then I want to be able to select different points. And I want to be able to see what the location of the stores that are within the circle and also those that are outside the circle. And the ones that are in the circle will color yellow and the others will be green. I also want to look at the street addresses for those stores so I can get a list. And I'm just going to show you where we're going with this. We'll select a different location here, and you can see our parameter up here, which is our Starbucks location, has changed, as well as the number of stores and their addresses. Now let's take a look at how we got here. We're going to go to the map itself, and I had to create two parameters, right? I had to create one that's the radius of a circle, and that's a floating point number. A floating point number, and it's set at 0.5. And then I had to create this spatial parameter. And we're going to spend a moment and look at this. Now, spatial parameters have a data type of spatial, okay? And we select a spatial shape. Now, the shape that we're using happens to be a point, okay? And what the parameter collects are the longitude and latitudes of that spatial shape. In this case, it's 1 point, so 1 longitude and 1 latitude. When we load the data in, you saw we had a latitude and a longitude, but we got to make it into a single point, and we do that with a spatial function called makePoint. And makePoint is just a spatial function. You can find all the spatial functions over here. MakePoint is just a spatial function, and you just input the latitude and the longitude, and it converts that into a single point. Drag that onto the canvas, and it creates all the points that we have here. Now I want to draw a circle around the point that I selected, or the point that's in the parameter. And all we do to do that is we've got that point and the radius and the units. And in this case, I selected kilometers. You could select any type of unit. It could be miles, it could be feet, it could be inches, but I selected kilometers. And then I just created this simple function that just says, look, this intersect is another spatial function, and it just intersects what's in the circle and all of the Starbucks locations. And what it says is, look, if the point is in the circle and it's one of the Starbucks locations that we had from make point, return a true. If not, return a false. And I use a color code here. True is yellow, false is green. I use that same formula over here on this list, and I just used it as a filter here, not as a color. I just put it up here and used it as a filter. I'm just going to pull that off. This is just a list of all the Starbucks locations. So we apply it as true, and we get the list of locations. Now, there's one additional thing we need to do. We go back to our dashboard, and we need a parameter action. And we come down here, dashboard actions, to create a parameter action. Now, I've already done it. You would just change parameter to select the parameter action, but I've already done it. Let's see what it looks like. And what this says is go to the Starbucks map, and based on a selection, change the parameter value. Now, this parameter value is that spatial parameter. So it's going to select the longitude and the latitude of the point that I select based on those make point values that we just got from that formula. Okay, and that's all there is to it. So now we can come in here and we can select a single Starbucks location, and lo and behold, our map changes and our list of location changes also. I place this up here. You can see the actual longitude and latitude. You don't have to put it on the dashboard. I put it there just so you can see what's going on. Well, if we can use a spatial parameter to select a spatial shape, we're not limited to a single point. In the second example, what I've done is I've got another file. It's a separate file. I brought it into Tableau. It's not connected to our Starbucks data, but this second file is a spatial file. It's loaded as a shape file, and it shows all of the subway lines in the city of New York. And if we take a look at those subway lines, they look something like this. And if we take a look at the data associated with those lines, we're going to give it just a second here. You're going to see, hey, this looks like pretty sparse data. All we've got is something that represents the subway line and a field that came from our data that's called a line string. Now, if you've worked with shape files before, you know that when you download a shape file, there's a lot of files that come with it. The file that you load into Tableau is the SHP file, and it calls data from the other files that are in the same folder as the SHP file to create the longitudes and latitudes that it needs. But it's important for us to know that what we have here is a line string type spatial data. Well, let's go back and we're going to take a look at the subway line itself. And on this one, I want to show you how we created our spatial files. Okay, I've got a parameter here. This is a spatial parameter, and the spatial parameter here is going to select a subway line, and that subway line is a multi-line string, and it collects all of the longitude and latitudes associated with that whole string. And if you look over here, this is right now what is in that data, and you can see there's multiple longitude and multiple latitudes in there. So anytime we change the subway line, it changes all of these points at one time. We have to take that data and we're going to create a little buffer around it. And just like we did before, we're going to take the lines that we pulled in, and we're going to create we're going to use that radius around that point. And in this case, I used miles so that I had a little bit more leeway on the subway line itself. And then I just plotted that so that we could see the subway lines, and I put their route symbol on color so that they had different colors. The Starbucks map is pretty much like what it looked like before. It's the same type of Starbucks map, and the Starbucks list, well, doesn't want to come up. Okay. We're going to clip that out of here. Okay, the Starbucks map is pretty much like what we had before. Now I want to show you where we're going with this. I put them both. I've taken the map for the subway lines and the map for all the Starbucks locations and put them on the same dashboard. I've also added something here. I've added a set of instructions. You might find yourself in a situation where you've got your dashboard looking the way that you want, and all of a sudden you realize you need some instructions for the user because it's getting a little complex, but you didn't want to mess up the dashboard itself. Well, that's how I found myself here, and all I did was create a text container, and I used the text editor to give a list of instructions. I've got a parameter here that's a show hide parameter. I'm just going to go over so that we can look at the parameter. It's a Boolean parameter, and a Boolean parameter just returns a true or false, but I didn't want it to say true and false. I wanted it to say something else, so I used some aliases here. True will say show instructions, and then false is hide instructions. And we can place that on our dashboard, and we can read the instructions. You find a subway line on the left-hand chart, then come over to the Starbucks chart and select a single location, and the pop-up is going to show us the store locations we want, and that's pretty much it. Now, I don't want to see the instructions anymore, so we can come over and we can hide the instructions using the parameter itself. Now, on this dashboard, there are two actions. Okay, one action is to select the subway line, and we're going from the subway map here. The parameter action is the parameter is the New York subway line. We are using the data from that file, the New York subway line file, and it's based on a selection. The other parameter is the same parameter that we used before, the same type of parameter that we used before. And we're looking on the Starbucks map, and we're getting a single Starbucks location. When I release the file, the parameter is sent to empty so that we'd see all the Starbucks locations. So now if we can select the subway line, we'll give it a second, and we'll see all the Starbucks locations around that line, and then we can come in and select a single location. And as before, we get the list of our Starbucks locations. I can release in our parameter action. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you learned a lot more about parameters and you're now more comfortable using them. Thank you for your time, and hope to see you next time. Bye now.